For Indian news outlets, they're known as the Big Four, topics that are surefire ways to sell newspapers and get ratings. They are politics, big business, celebrities, which usually means Bollywood, and of course, the Indian obsession with cricket. It's a news mix that has featured heavily during the exponential growth of Indian media over the past 25 years, but it's also pushed the stories of roughly 2/3 of the country's population to the margins, the edges of the news agenda. India has a population of 1.2 billion people, and more than 800 million of them live and work in rural areas. Despite that, and the vast array of news outlets in India, those outlets only had one full-time rural affairs editor, and his job has disappeared. When the daily paper that he worked for, The Hindu, restructured last year, according to him, in India's villages, you don't look for stories, they kick you in the face. The problem is there's almost no one working the beat. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on the curious case of the Indian media's rural blind spot.
We have breaking news coming. Not enough confidence in the market that the
promised to give you the first glimpse of what the capital has decided.
Our entire focus is on metropolitan India. What happens in Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, Chennai, that makes the headlines.
There's no systematic coverage of rural India. The beat doesn't exist. In the Indian media, the post of rural affairs editor or rural editor existed just once. I was it.
This is a phenomenon that you find around the world where the voice of the nation is seen to be the voice of a middle class.
Why do you even need a phone that curves? Well, the correct answer to that is because you can.
It's almost as if we think viewers are not interested in rural India. So our entire hierarchy of news has very little space for rural India.
To understand just how little news coverage rural India gets, it helps to break down the news output. We asked an Indian media research firm to analyze the coverage of 3 mainstream English and Hindi newspapers for the months of November and December 2014. The results of that study showed that across the 6 papers, the percentage of front-page stories relating to rural India was 0, except for 1.37% of coverage in The Hindu in December 2014. On TV, an analysis of the primetime programming of 6 channels in November 2014 revealed that rural news didn't make it past 7% of total news time on any channel. In fact, it was as low as 0.19% on one outlet. That's a fifth of 1% of total coverage for almost 70% of the Indian population. The lack of rural coverage isn't because of a lack of news. In fact, in the past decade, one particular story has taken a serious turn for the worse.
In India, we've had an ongoing agrarian crisis in which 300,000 farmers have committed suicide since 1995. In the epicenter, the epicenter of these suicides is a region called Vidarbha in the state of Maharashtra in Western India, of which Mumbai is the capital.
You are invited to celebrate Indian Textiles Day.
In Mumbai, the great event of the year was the Lakme Fashion Week.
Bollywood heroine Priyanka Chopra showstopper-ga vyavaharinchi Fashion Week.
Day 4 of Lakme Fashion Week
saw a whole bunch of A-listers as front row guests.
1 hour away from this horrendous epidemic of suicides in Mumbai city, the Lakme Fashion Week drew 500 accredited journalists who sat there for a week. Now, I made a count. How many journalists from outside the affected region of suicides were actually covering the suicides and had actually spent a full week in that place? I counted 6, including myself and my collaborator.
There is a segment of India's media, and it's not insignificant, that gets across some of the news from beyond the boardrooms, the catwalks, and the city centers. It's the vernacular press. The papers publishing in languages other than English, like Marathi, Kannada, and Punjabi. Narasimha Reddy reports with the Telugu daily E-Nadu. It's the largest selling paper across the southern states of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. Reddy has reported extensively for the paper on farmer suicides, racketeering in the irrigation industry, and large-scale displacements of entire villages of people cleared for industrial projects. But Reddy is the exception to the rule, and he has a theory on why papers like his are able to afford more space for rural reporting.
It is a fact that the big national papers have very little space for regional news, let alone rural reporting. But vernacular papers have a different approach. My own paper, E-Nadu, has published a significant number of stories from rural Andhra and Telangana. The reason for this is because the reporters, the management, we all have roots in the villages. When we go back home, we see the stories unfolding around us, and we report them as extensively as our publications can make space for.
It used to be a whole lot better. That old comfortable thought that the Indian language newspapers will always do a better job, that stands very threatened now. It stands very threatened because the same guy owns all the newspapers, whether they're in English or in Hindi or in Bengali or in Telugu or in Malayalam. It's a giant assembly line sausage factory. Right? You have English sausages or you have Hindi sausages, but you have sausages.
In India, the media market is crowded and competitive. Proprietors are looking for slick products that grab eyeballs, advertising, and, especially in the case of English language media, influence. There are significant investments into news reporting, but the beats are prioritized, and coverage of India's rural population is near the bottom. For instance, when P. Sainath resigned as rural affairs editor at The Hindu, it brought an end to the only such position in the entire Indian media landscape. The Hindu has not seen fit to replace him, and they didn't respond to our request for comment. The death of the rural affairs editorship says something about editorial priorities and about the 800 million Indians whose needs are going unserved, whose stories are going untold.
Let me be honest, the business model of television today is struggling to try and plow back investments into the business. I would like investment in a full-time agriculture editor. I would like a greater investment in the Northeast and, report India not just through the eyes of Lutyens Delhi, but report India from every corner.
The rural beat is very different to covering politics or business. A lot of it is done on foot. You walk between villages, you interview people who aren't used to explaining their issues. Sometimes the travel itself takes a few days, and then it takes another couple of days to piece together complex situations. It takes time, effort, and a different use of resources than when you're covering politics.
Less and less investment is taking place in news gathering. As a result, you're looking for the soft option, which is the place which is 1 kilometer from your office, not the little village which is 1,000 kilometers away.
India's rural poor simply doesn't factor into the equation of India as a superpower, or indeed India's very image of itself as the world's largest democracy. So the rural poor are seen rather as a problem to be solved, and I think it's a huge mistake actually to view that many of the country's citizens as something that actually impede the country's progress.
If you want to get an insight into stories of rural India, there are a few alternative media outlets worth clicking onto. P. Sainath, who you saw in our report, runs a website called PARI, the People's Archive of Rural India. Apart from hosting and archiving rural reportage, the site covers the lifestyles, languages, professions, and arts of rural India. PARI is funded largely through donations. Much of the work is done by volunteers. CGNet Swara is a mobile news service based on phone technology that enables rural communities to record their own stories and access recordings of other stories from their area. Launched with some funding from the Washington, D.C.-based International Center for Journalists, CGNet Swara aims to, quote, democratize the media space. And for those of you who read Hindi, Gao Connection is an outlet that calls itself India's only rural newspaper. It's got a good website. The printed paper is distributed in the state of Uttar Pradesh, and just 9 months ago, India's state broadcaster Doordarshan commissioned journalists at Gao to produce a weekly TV show, episodes of which you can find on the Gao website.